Welcome to this session entitled Managed Connected Native Oh My. We're going to talk about application deployment models on Snowflake. My name is Kevin McGinley, and I'm a technical director on the SnowCAT team at Snowflake. We are part of our product group that helps customers adopt bleeding edge capabilities in Snowflake, and I specialize a lot with data application builders. Like my guest, Craig, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Craig Pohan with MessageGears. MessageGears is an enterprise-grade customer engagement platform. We help marketers with millions of customers communicate to all of them in a personalized way on a daily basis. Let's dig into the agenda.
Absolutely, Craig. So in this session, we're going to talk about the three different deployment options that you have when building an application on Snowflake. I'll go into each of those models in detail. So we'll talk about managed app and connected apps. Then I'll turn it over to Craig, where he can talk about MessageGears as a connected app and how that works and why they built their application that way. I'll come back and talk about how you can actually build a hybrid model using managed and connected to give you an idea of all the different options that you have building apps in Snowflake. Then I want to introduce our new native apps model that we introduced at our June summit. Then I'll have Craig come on and talk about how they're thinking about how native apps can transform their application development within MessageGears. And then we'll wrap up with looking at all of these options and all the different traits at a glance so that you can make the best decision for how to build your application in Snowflake. So there are three different types of deployment approaches building applications on Snowflake. And you can see them here. The first one, which I've touched upon, is managed apps. This is where the builder is going to run the application in their own account. They're going to set up all the infrastructure. They're going to have an application UI. They're going to have their customers connect to their environment, and customers are going to entrust the builder to host their data within the builder's environment. This is contrasted with connected apps, where the reverse happens. The builder is now going to actually connect into the customer environment, so the customer owns their own Snowflake, maintains control of their own data, and the builder connects into the customer account via supported credentials. The last model, which I'll talk about at the end, is called native apps. And this is where we looked at the first two models and said, how can we allow our builders to build something that runs in the customer Snowflake account without the builder having to actually connect into the customer Snowflake account to run their code? They're going to be able to deploy their application to the Snowflake marketplace, and then consumers are going to be able to install the applications into their own Snowflake account. Now you're going to choose between these different models based on, how does your app work from a business model perspective? How do you charge for it? How do customers expect to use it? What data privacy concerns are there that customers may have with regards to their data and entrusting you, the builder, with it? And then how will the data processing occur? Who's going to pay for that data processing? Which environment is it going to occur in? These are all things that you're going to think about. And like I said, I'm going to talk about how you can actually combine these into a hybrid model and support multiple options with your application. When I talk about these three different models, I'm going to talk about them across 9 different comparison traits. Now, these aren't the only traits that you can talk about when comparing these models, but these are the ones that I think are the most interesting or the most important. The first one is, what is the architecture composition of the application? What's possible? What can you do when you're architecting your application? The next is, who controls source data ingestion? And conversely, who controls data processing? Who ultimately handles the data at rest? Who's entrusted with securing that data and making sure that it stays private and usable within the application? Who's paying for storage and compute? What are the different tenancy options that you have when building your application? How many different data platforms can you support with your application beyond Snowflake? How will the customer interface that data and access the information that's in the application? And lastly, if the customer wants access to the raw data behind the application, can they get to that? How? What tools are used to do that? So these are the different traits that I'm going to look at as I dive into each of these deployment models in detail. So let's start with managed apps. I'm going to show a slide like this, and on the left-hand side, there'll be a diagram that kind of encapsulates what the different deployment model is and how it works. And then our 9 traits are on the right-hand side that we'll use to describe how these application deployment models differentiate from each other. So let me first talk about managed app, where again, the builder is running the application within their own Snowflake account. And as you can see, they're also going to be ingesting the data, integrating it within their cloud service provider platform and their Snowflake account. And they're most likely going to be providing an application tier for their customers to access the data. If a customer happens to be a Snowflake customer, maybe they will use data sharing for data access, but that's not something that will necessarily be true for all of their customers. So let's look at these 9 traits. First of all, when you're building this type of application, you can use other technologies in your application architecture. If you need cloud service functions or an OLTP database or some other capability within your cloud service provider, you can use that in conjunction with your Snowflake account. Most likely as a builder, you're going to manage the data ingestion for the customer. There might be a situation where you have the customer upload some of their data, but generally speaking, you're going to provide the mechanism to have the data get into the Snowflake environment. In addition, then, you're going to actually process that data within your own Snowflake account. Maybe you'll use your cloud service provider to do some of that processing, but ultimately you're going to control that. And as such, the newly processed data is going to rest with you, the builder. You're going to be in control of that data. And because of that, you're going to be paying for the storage of that data. You're going to be paying for the compute processing of that data. How you choose to bill that back to your customer is up to you, but ultimately you're in charge of that. Now, when you build a managed application, you have access to multiple tenancy options and approaches, and it's up to you to choose the right one that's best for your application. But when you're building this application, you're probably just going to build it on one data platform like Snowflake. It's not going to make sense for you to support multiple cloud data platforms in this type of model. And then from a customer access perspective, most of the time they're going to access it through an application tier that you provide. And if they want raw access to the data, if they're a Snowflake customer, you can share with them the data, or you'll provide them the capabilities to talk to an API or get data extracts through the user interface. Now let's contrast that with connected apps. How are connected apps different than managed apps? Well, the first thing that you're going to see in the diagram here is you're still going to have an environment as a builder. How much of these different components that you use is up to you and your application. You're most likely going to have, a Snowflake account where you're going to do some sort of processing or build some degree of code, given that your customers are going to be running in a Snowflake environment. But you could also have an application tier or cloud service provider capabilities that you're integrating with your connected app. All of that is kind of up to you. But then you're going to make a connection via supported credentials that the customer is going to provide to you to access the customer's account and do all of the processing. So everything's going to happen in the customer's Snowflake account, and ultimately they're going to be in control of the app and the processing. So as I mentioned, you could have other technologies in your application architecture. If you needed to use things outside of Snowflake, you can do that because you have the capabilities to connect into a customer's Snowflake environment with other cloud service provider services and capabilities. Who manages the data ingestion will be dependent on the type of application that you're building and where it makes the most sense to do the data ingestion. Most of the time, the customer is going to do the data ingestion, and that's what we see most in connected apps. But there could be scenarios where the builder is augmenting the data that they're ingesting first, or they're in charge of all the data ingestion. They're passing that through into the customer account, kind of like a data replication tool. When it comes to ingestion, most of the time the customer is going to ingest the data into their account. But there are situations where the builder might have a data set that they want to include in the application that they could be ingesting, or perhaps the customer is relying on the builder to do all of the data ingestion, passing it through into the customer Snowflake account. Now, because of that, the builder and the customer may be sharing some of the processing and ultimately maybe sharing some of the compute and storage costs. But at the end of the day, the data rests with the customer. They're the ones that are going to be in charge of storing the data, securing the data, and ultimately they want as little data to leave their account as possible. Now, when the builder is building this application and using this deployment model, they don't really have any tenancy options to consider. Because each customer has their own account, you're going with an account per tenant model, and there aren't really too many different ways to deviate from that. But the builder has the ability to design their code to support other platforms. So not all of your customers necessarily have to be on Snowflake. They could be running on other cloud data platforms too, and you could choose to offer support for those platforms in this model. The customer may interact with an application tier, potentially to configure the application or control application state, but it's not required. We have plenty of builders who are delivering connected apps without any kind of UI. And ultimately, the customer has raw access to the data in their account, so they don't need the builder to provide any other kind of method to access the raw data. So let's turn it over to Craig and hear about how MessageGears builds a connected application and how their customers are leveraging that application. Craig?
Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. MessageGears is the only warehouse-native customer engagement platform built for enterprise brands that market to millions of customers. We do this by directly connecting to the customer's data environment. Using this direct connection, we enable marketers to build profitable and loyal customer relationships with all of the data that they have available across every channel that they market today. Customers typically see large MarTech savings, upwards of 60%, with a return on investment that is far outpacing other alternatives. Our unique architecture allows for a rapid deployment and elastic scaling to meet all customer demands. Our architecture looks very complicated at first, but is very simple in the end. We apply an application tier directly within the brand's environment that connects to their data cloud, performs data transformations on data streams and data APIs, and then have associated cloud environments that handles all of the elastic rendering and high horsepower operations to make sure the brand's messages reach every endpoint they do today. When looking at our application from the Snowflake Connected Application Framework, we fall with the application tier sitting behind the customer's environment and connecting directly to their data set. This gives the customer the system of record and allows all secure PII to remain directly in the customer environment. It also enables the marketer to use all their data assets for any kind of decisioning and orchestration. Our application that operates in the MessageGears cloud will only use the data exiting the environment to deliver messaging and activation on channel partners. And in the end, all of our data is shared back to the customer so that the cycle can repeat for optimization purposes. Kevin, back to you for the hybrid app model.
Thanks, Craig. That was awesome. Now I want to talk about the hybrid model where you can combine managed applications with connected applications. So in this example, imagine you're a managed application builder. And what you're going to do is build your application the way that you would. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking to yourself that down the road, there's the potential for you to have customers that are going to want the connected model. And you design your application in a way that would make it very easy and transparent for you to run your application within the customer account. Most likely what you're going to do when you're building that is kind of design with either an object per tenant or a multi-tenant table approach so that you can easily sort of peel off your logic and run that in an individual customer account so that you can optimize your application just for that customer. So basically what you're doing is you're designing and supporting both models with minimal code variance. So you can easily transition for when that first customer comes along. You can choose the best tenancy model for your application. Even account per tenant, which I didn't mention before, would still be in play here. Then you're building your application with an eye towards offering that connected model. So you build it in a way that allows you to transition easily when that first connected customer comes along. And most likely it's going to come along because a customer is going to come to you and say, hey, I don't want the data to leave my Snowflake account. Either this is PII data or it's data that I have already ingested and spent time ingesting into my Snowflake account, and I want your application to work with it. I want to have the flexibility to do more processing than you allow for, where I, as a customer, will pay more for that compute and be willing to use the data more than what you offer through the managed tier. And this allows you to give a lot of flexibility with how you sort of the different business models that you can charge for your application, because now your connected customers can use the application in a different way with an elevated sense of capability and permissioning because of how they're running it within their account. And while I haven't talked about native apps, you can also consider native apps in the hybrid model. Oh, by the way, starting with a managed application and moving to a connected application is not the only path that you have to take. I'm just using that here as an example. So now that I've mentioned native applications, let's go ahead and talk about in detail what the native application framework is. So at its core, it is three things. First, we're going to allow you to use all of the primitives that you can build things in Snowflake with to build them into a packaged application. We're going to allow you to bundle those up in a way where you can do more than just basic function capability. You can now start to orchestrate processes that have much more richness and complexity to them using whatever we support in Snowflake. And the beauty of that is, if you think about it from what Snowflake supports today, we are bringing more things to bear in the Snowflake Data Cloud down the road. For example, we announced back at our June Summit that you'll be able to take a packaged Streamlit application and ship it within the native application framework. So think about that. As Snowflake starts to expand the capabilities of what it's able to deliver within the Data Cloud, all of those become in play for you to build applications with. So that's a fantastic way for you to start building using the primitives that we offer. From there, you can distribute and monetize your application on the Snowflake Marketplace. We used to be the Snowflake Data Marketplace, but now that we've recognized that application builders can distribute and sell their applications on the marketplace, we've renamed it from the Snowflake Data Marketplace to just the Snowflake Marketplace. And this allows customers to easily find your application and then deploy it within their own account. I can go out to an application, click Get, pay for it, and it will start installing into my account immediately. This is a fantastic way, just like you use on your mobile applications or your mobile phones today to get applications from either the App Store or whatever mobile platform you use to get into your environment. You'll be able to do that same thing in your Snowflake account. This is in private preview right now, but let me describe to you how it works in more detail. So first of all, the builder is going to be building the application in their account. So this is a very Snowflake-centric model. So they're going to build that application in their account. They're going to test it there. They're going to package everything up using the framework that we provide. And they'll be able to then list that application on the Snowflake Marketplace. Then customers A and B on the right-hand side will be able to download that exact same application into their accounts. They'll each get the same code, the same processing logic, et cetera, but it can work on the data within their account, or they can generate new data within their account that'll be different for each customer. And all that processing happens within their account. And since it does, they're able to access everything directly within their account based on the controls that the application provider provides within the application. So because of this, again, the builder is limited to supporting Snowflake primitives in the architecture. You're not going to run this on multiple data clouds. And as of right now, we don't have the means to use other cloud services in your application. So you're going to be sticking to what Snowflake supports in this model. Now, again, for the most part, the customer is going to manage the data ingestion, but applications can include data shares. So the builder can ingest some of the data into their account and share it across as part of the application into the customer account. All of the processing, though, is going to happen in the customer account, and all of the data at rest is going to be with the customer. So the customer's in control of all the data, but they're paying for all the storage and compute as well. There really is only one tenancy option here, so you won't have to think about tenancy in this model. But ultimately, you're going to design for Snowflake and design for your customer's Snowflake account when you're building your application. The customer gets to interact with the data directly in Snowflake, although, like I said before, with our Streamlit acquisition, we are going to provide a means for you to provide an interface so that you can have your customer interact with a UI as part of the application. And then ultimately, the builder controls what data and code the customer can see in the application database. So there is some control for the developer to make sure they protect their IP and make sure that the customer can't see any of the processing that is occurring in the account that might expose some of the secret sauce of what that builder has built. So Craig, why don't you talk about now how MessageGears is thinking about native apps now that you've learned about that model back at our June summit?
Thank you, Kevin. As we spoke about earlier, MessageGears is a connected application today, although we're eagerly looking at the native application framework to simplify our delivery of logic. Currently, we have an application tier running behind the customer's environment, and with this new framework, we're able to deliver our logic in a more continuous manner and a more reliable delivery for customer execution. Customers will be able to take advantage of changing models and natively integrate their data science algorithms into our running logic and deliver continuous transformations to their data cloud. Through all of these operations, we'll be able to improve overall delivery and give marketers an even more powerful customer engagement platform. Thanks, Kevin. Back to you.
Thanks, Craig. I can't wait to see what MessageGears build with the new native application framework. It's just super exciting to see customers get their hands on this capability and bring new products to the marketplace. Super awesome. I wanted to end with this slide here, which gives a great matrix across the 3 different deployment options and the 9 different traits that we talked about. Now, I'm not going to cover every single cell in this slide, but what I did want to cover are some of the sort of asterisk exceptions that I didn't mention as I was going over the slides before. So in the native application model, you can see there in the upper right-hand corner, I mentioned that you can only really use Snowflake in your architecture. And what I didn't call out at that point in time was that it is possible to use external functions within native apps. So it is possible to have some of your code running outside of the customer Snowflake environment. Now, this requires strict permission from the customer, and as such, it's kind of an edge case. But I do want to bring it up as something for you to think about when you're building your native apps. And this is also true from the data processing location perspective. Because you can use those external functions, it does mean that something could be running outside of the customer account with their permission. As far as the data end state goes, I mentioned before that the customer is in total control of the data, but I want to just reemphasize here that it is possible for the builder to share data sets with the application code logic. I just want to reinforce that point. And as such, there could be some data within the application that the builder owns, not the customer. And that's okay because the builder can provide controlled access to that data and it can be used as part of the application, but it is data that the builder controls and owns. And then lastly, I do want to call out in the managed application that while I mentioned before that your customers are most likely going to go through an app tier, there is a tenancy model called account per tenant where the builder can spin up a Snowflake account for each customer and allow the customer to actually connect directly to Snowflake, either through Snowflake's UI or using one of our drivers to connect their own tooling to the Snowflake account. And in that model, the builder does not have to provide an app tier for the customer to engage with. More likely, they're going to be providing credentials to log into that managed account so that the customer can run the things that they need to run there. I want to thank everyone for listening to this session today. Of course, I also want to thank our guest, Craig. You can engage with Snowflake at developers.snowflake.com or join the community at community.snowflake.com. Craig, do you want to tell them where they can find MessageGears?
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me on this session. And for those who want to learn more about MessageGears, please visit us at MessageGears.com. Have a great day.
If you like this video, please click the like button below. And if you want more content from Snowflake, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Feeling drained? Feel the difference when you get powered by Snowflake.
All right! Woo! 71, 72, top two. Yeah!
We get it, Mark. You're powered by Snowflake now.